Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Caseman. I'm the Executive Director of Think Kids, and I'm happy to welcome you to Session 2 of the 2022 Health and Hunger Summit Series. This is a virtual series as part of a larger project where we take a candid look at connections between the healthcare system and community resources that address hunger. For this series, again this year, we're focusing primarily on 3 counties in our state: Boone, Lincoln, and Logan. Health and hunger are profoundly connected. Their systems should be too. You can find more information on our website, thinkkidswv.org, and on the Think Kids Facebook page. And we hope you'll help join in the discussion, because now more than ever in this moment, we need to unite in our efforts to ensure all West Virginians are as healthy as they can be with access to healthcare and nutritious food. There are a lot of challenges to this, but I've met some great people in these counties who are leading efforts to build these bridges. And so we're glad you're here with us today to meet them and join the conversation. Let's get started. Go ahead and type questions or comments in the Q&A while they're fresh in your mind if you'd like. We'll get to them as the conversation progresses. And with that, let's get underway by thanking our sponsors for the event series, the Palatine Foundation of Huntington, for their generous financial support again this year for the project. If you are a nonprofit that serves their foundation service region and have a mission to advance transformative health initiatives, we suggest you visit their website to learn more about their important work and grant opportunities. We appreciate the opportunity to work with them and their support for work like this. Let's begin the conversation today by asking the question, can youth help build a better network? With some quotes from food resource providers from around the state. In 2020, Think Kids did extensive surveying of pantries across West Virginia. We stay in contact with a number of them. So we emailed and asked them, can youth help build a better resource network? Here are a few of the answers we received. Our pantry, Tyler Mountain Cross Lanes Community Services, does not have any teen involvement. Our pantry operates during school hours, and we do not have any evening operations. It's a good idea, it just doesn't fit our pantry. Next is, we have youth involved in our food pantry the following ways. They assist our church volunteers in delivering food to the 3 local income, elderly, disabled housing. They will come with the churches whose turn it is that month. Kids from David's Stewart pack over 300 bags of groceries each month for distribution. Students from the Osteopathic Medical School assist us on the distribution days and also occasionally collect items for us. Local youth groups occasionally collect food hygiene supplies for us. The benefits of having youth involved is that there is an awareness for them about hunger in the community, and also they get a sense of service to the community. Plus, they have energy. We appreciate them. Sounds like they have a really positive relationship there. Next, we need some youth adult help so badly, especially the days we receive our food truck. I just posted to our church about anyone involved in sports, band, Boys or Girl Scouts, etc., to see if their group would help volunteer, even if every other month. Majority of our helpers are in their mid-60s and 70s. It is definitely a huge need in our food outreach. Any other suggestions would be helpful. And finally, in Petersburg, we have a high school youth college students helping as volunteers in both our community food pantry and our weekend backpack food program. They are enthusiastic and responsible volunteers. I'd highly recommend incorporating this population into programs. Many of them do it for community service hours, so there is some turnover each year, but some stick around after they have that need cared for. So it seems as if there's a lot of different ways youth are engaged across the state, and the need and interest is certainly there. All of the responses we received were encouraging and supportive of this concept. So with that, I'm really interested to dig into today's discussion. Let's meet our panelists in alphabetical order. Tami Bowling is the director of the Big Ugly Community Center in Lincoln County. She was recently selected as a 2022 West Virginia Can't Wait Hometown Hero for her organization's service of providing meals and educational activities for families during the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Tami. Hawley Carlson is the Executive Director of Volunteer West Virginia, the state's Commission on National and Community Service. Each year in West Virginia, about 700 people serve in the AmeriCorps program across the state through Volunteer West Virginia. Welcome, Hawley. Nyla Cobb is stuck at the airport in Chicago due to bad weather and can't join us today, unfortunately, but she did send in written comments, and I'll share those as the conversation progresses. She has 16 years of experience with West Virginia University Extension Service as a 4-H agent and has worked with the West Virginia Statewide After School Network for 7 years. And finally is Aiden Taylor. He is the Executive Director of the Clay County Community Emergency Response Team and a recent Clay County High School graduate. He will attend Harvard University in the fall. So welcome all of you. And make sure to turn off your mute. Great, so let's start with the first question. We'll begin the conversation with that first question, then leave the Q&A open in case folks want to share comments or questions, and we'll try to get to them as the conversation progresses. So let's look at the current landscape around the state. How are youth, specifically high school and college-aged individuals, already working to address food insecurity or improve access to nutritious foods in their communities?
Can kick us off. This is something that AmeriCorps is involved in a little bit. So we do have youth in a specific program I would mention is Grow Ohio Valley is AmeriCorps program in the Ohio Valley and the Panhandle. There they have a whole program about farm education, healthy eating, and providing healthy food to children in those areas. And that's very much led by young adults. So I think having these there are some, kind of things going on that are really cool in this space. And I think young people have a really great part to play in expanding and growing this work.
Great, thanks, Hawley.
I'll follow up there a little bit. At the super local level, there are a couple of different ways that people participate, specifically in Clay County that I'm aware of. I'm sure it occurs across the state as well. We have people as young as middle school or elementary students who are working with their class or maybe a homeroom group that are trying to bring in food resources, whether it's canned or non-perishable foods, and that they're then taking and donating as a part of their class activity, maybe on a social studies class assignment or something. And to the same effect, we also have probably high school age students and some upper middle school, like 8th graders, that are helping at local food drives, as well as food distribution events.
Thanks. That's interesting. So for both of you, Hawley and Aiden, do you know if there's like some structure to, is this part of a larger plan, or is this something that's really done, like Aiden said, on that super local level, kind of informal?
For us, I would say that it's pretty much informal. My organization has a branch and a couple of other groups in the community and also across the state try and help to, start a registration process or create a schedule or kind of organize it in some manner. But I think for the most part, especially regarding food as a volunteer opportunity, I think it's pretty much disorganized, not necessarily negatively, just more come as you will rather than, here's a set plan.
Right.
Yeah, and AmeriCorps is really structured. Members with Grow Ohio Valley serve for 9 months or a year. And it's very, very structured for them to be a part of that program for that period of time.
Great, thanks, Hawley. I'm going to read what Nyla sent to us. At West Virginia University Extension, we are working with our summer programs as summer food programs. Energy Express works to serve breakfast and lunch daily to underserved youth in the 6-week reading and nutrition program. Over half of our counties are also offering summer foods at residential camps. Another summer program through West Virginia University Extension Service is allowing kids to eat healthy while contributing to the local economy. So the pop-up market is supported by SNAP Ed and is geared towards the state's school-age children. Students are given up to $5 and they can shop seasonally. So I see that it's a great opportunity for kids to eat, but I don't necessarily see how kids are also getting engaged in kind of the planning and the logistics of feeding the kids in the community. And so I think that that's really an important part of this process. You know, when we were talking about this last year, during last year's summit, our interest really was in trying to build not just an infrastructure to help kind of the senior citizens who are holding up this whole food infrastructure by, you know, by their volunteer hours, but also to try and give a meaningful community experience to young people, because we have this problem with, you know, our youth leaving once they go to college and then not coming back to the community and sharing what they've learned, you know, staying with family. And in order to do that, we think they've got to, you know, kind of become a vested stakeholder in that community at a very young age. And so let's continue to the next question. What are the benefits of engaging youth to help address hunger at the local level, both for the community and youth? So I'll start with what Nyla said. Engaging youth can also help them build their own self-efficacy, which is a great point. Youth given an opportunity to provide service to others helps them move forward as productive adults and add to future communities.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. I think it is bi-directional here, both benefit for the organization and the individual. Personally, I think, you know, volunteering has given me a way of self-exploration, finding who I am, my part in the community, and how I can contribute, whether it's a positive thing or something that I'm really not good at and maybe shouldn't try professionally. I think for the organization, you know, young volunteers, we've incorporated them in our organization and other organizations that I've worked with across the county and state of West Virginia. Volunteers that are your typical age, which unfortunately in West Virginia is an elderly population. And, you know, we don't really have people of all ages volunteering, and some tasks are hard. And also it's hard to find volunteers in general. Bringing young volunteers in, giving them a way to add what they think, it gives us a new idea of how that works, whether it's using social media, using a new platform or something to get information out, as well as just a set of new ideas. A younger generation thinks a little bit differently than each age group, and in putting that into the planning table and working out things is really impactful.
And a lot of times at the community center, we use our youth as an introduction to the volunteerism. So that way they can see the different things that the food pantries and all of the programs that uses volunteers. So, and you know, and as like you said, to show them what's going on so they can pick and choose and learn and explore the volunteering in the community. Because there's a lot of times when I have a focus group with them, certain projects, they don't know that they use volunteers so that they can actually volunteer and be able to work in those programs.
Go ahead, Hawley.
That's interesting to hear, because my comment was, I mean, I think when we talk about young volunteers, we have a bit of a responsibility to them to teach them about the community and the volunteer role, and to help them become lifelong volunteers and help them explore what they're interested in. And it sounds like Tami's doing a really good job of that already at the community center.
Yes, yeah, my radar popped up when she said focus group. So we have a tendency sometimes when we have younger generations helping, it's kind of come and do the things that we can't do, right? So lift the boxes, or, you know, they don't get to become that vested stakeholder. And, you know, Aiden made that point of, I want to try different things so I can figure out what I'm good at or what I want to do, or, you know, maybe want to learn a new skill. But if we don't make them meaningful collaborators, if we're not intentional in bringing them in and creating a real project, then we risk that chance of, you know, of not giving them skin in the game, so to speak, not making them a vested stakeholder. And so they may not keep participating. It may not be something that maintains viability because it's not giving the young generations what they need from the experience.
If you don't mind if I add something to that there a little bit. I think we do this sometimes as organizational leaders when we think of teen and youth is specifically a group that maybe we need to try and access, when before we should just start including them from the beginning, and looking at them as just any other volunteer. We don't have to separate volunteers by age, sex, religion, color. It doesn't matter. They're a volunteer, they're helping. And we analyze each volunteer at what they're capable of doing, what they're trained to do. I think that really, especially as a teen volunteer myself, being looked at equally as the same as an adult, as long as you have the training or have the ability to do something. I think that that is kind of what is that hook, the fish hook that grabs you and makes you feel like you're connected or a part, that you're valued at the organization just as much as anyone else is.
That's a wonderful point, Aiden. Hawley, I don't mean to put you in the spot, but you work with the AmeriCorps folks. Have you ever heard anecdotally somebody say, you know, that they wished as they came into a situation that they had more of an equal opportunity to become a stakeholder in the group? Or have you ever heard of that dynamic before?
Yeah, so AmeriCorps members are placed with a wide variety of organizations with a wide variety of capacities, and some of them do a really good job of bringing an AmeriCorps member on, making them a part of the team, and giving them really meaningful work. And that's the dream. That's what we want. We want those people that really, really value their AmeriCorps members and are able to create that place where the member can really make a difference. And some organizations just haven't thought it through all the way yet, or haven't gotten that in place, and the member doesn't necessarily feel that they've been really empowered to do the work that they signed up for. So, I mean, that's certainly something that we are always really cognizant of, and always wanting, as the state agency that kind of represents AmeriCorps, that we're providing support to people that host AmeriCorps programs and training, and telling them how to do this, and to really think through their AmeriCorps opportunities, because we want people when they serve to really be able to make a difference, to really get out in the community, to really feel like they're being a meaningful part of change. And if we're failing to do that, we're really not engaging young people in the kind of service we want to see.
These are excellent points. I'm going to push the pause button on this because I want to circle back to this when we hit a question a little ways down the road. What are the drawbacks, challenges, or special considerations we must remember when working with younger populations?
I'll start off. Sometimes I think the schedule is completely different as far as people who are young. The summer is a perfect time to volunteer. During the winter and fall months, it's a little bit different. It's handling school. And I think one of the people that you had mentioned there, the testimonials to begin with, even mentioned that they don't have any sort of evening operations. I think something that you really have to consider is opening up to either virtual volunteers or finding a way to integrate, whether maybe it's just making a phone call, making a social media post, making the poster for your food drive that you're getting ready to have. Finding a way that you can incorporate volunteers. Something else to consider is training and the ability to drive and transportation, those sorts of things. Training, sometimes a lot of them are open to younger people. They just don't know that they can take those trainings too. There's really some and most trainings, whether it be first aid or something with FEMA, or a training about how to effectively manage food resources. A lot of them aren't restricted to an age. It's just if you can pass the exam, making sure that teens don't feel that they're coming in and, you're just, like you said, you're going to do what we can't do, that they're also taking the same training. They're doing the same requirements that the other volunteers are doing too.
That's a great point, Aiden. I'm thinking while you're talking of, we have now a college student who's working with us on another project. The project is navigating the healthcare system for families with children with developmental disabilities, right? And so we had a college student contact us who said, my time is very limited because she's going to school, she has a job, but she also wants to help. So she said, can I do what can I do? I'm willing to do social media. And so she's much better at that than I am, right? So it was really fortuitous that she contacted us, but it's, clearly a skill that she has that she can bring to the table. And she already had the pitch ready when she came to us. So it was really, she was really very savvy about it. And, now we're going to be able to give her a couple of $1,000s just to show, some gratitude for her time. But I think that's so important, that one of the challenges that we may have as an organization is we get kind of rigid maybe in how we do things, and then we just give the younger generation just as little smaller allocated space to what it is that they can do, rather than trying to get to know them, giving them that opportunity to adapt ourselves to better meet them and where they are.
Hawley said it, you have to be open to change. I think that that's the most difficult thing. But also to what you said, it's that driver motivation. That's the most important, check a box to mark, is as long as their drive and motivations there, I think that, you can incorporate any volunteer in any sort of situation in most cases.
Great point. I'm going to read what Nyla had to say. We can't forget we have different children than we did pre-pandemic. Youth are in a more fragile mental health states, however. They can have mental wellness issues and function. We just need to always have that caring and listening adult to be positive and provide helpful relationships. And so I want to make 2 points. So first off, I think that goes back to being respectful and mindful of younger generations, as you should be for any generation. And then secondly, a point that I spoke with WVU Extension about previously, and that is, we also have to be mindful of the logistics of working with much younger populations, of what they can do and they can't do. That WVU, 4-H, they get that many of the folks who are serving as mentors go through background checks. I mean, these are things that if you're going to create a more robust outreach and, youth engagement program, that you really need to consider before you set something up. Anyone else have any other thoughts before we move on?
One of the things that we sometimes forget to consider is that the youth that are the volunteers, they also need some time just to be able to socialize and just to be able to get a little bit of togetherness as they're doing the volunteer work.
That's also a really good point. And I think that it's something that we talk about along with the questions. I could be wrong, but we all have to have a sense of community. I mean, that's really, especially with the work that we're talking about, is about building relationships and building a sense of community. And so many of our older, as the folks we talked to last year during this summit series, many of our older volunteers, some of them have been doing that work for 30 or 40 years. And they're a member of that church and they know everybody. And so they already have built a really robust sense of community in that place. So it's important to be mindful that you're doing the same thing with those younger folks, because we know, due to things such as the drug crisis, that we have a number of, an increased number of kids who don't have that sense of place, relationships, and community. They may not have that one caring adult, which, the people who are working with these younger folks can be that person to them.
I think that opens the door to a span of control, ensuring that you have somebody that can be kind of that mentor for a volunteer, that you don't have one person trying to manage 50 volunteers and, they know your name, but they know nothing else about you. Making a connection is very important.
Great point. I was talking to somebody as we were preparing for session 3 this afternoon, who said there were 2 of us and we managed 287 volunteers. That seems insurmountable to me, but building relationships with all 287 would be virtually impossible unless, there was extended years. So very good point. Are we ready to move on to question 4? Have any other thoughts? Okay, how can we better connect youth with volunteer opportunities?
I think this is probably one of my favorite questions of the list that we ask, because I think this is where youth really fits in, and technology. I think technology is an excellent way for us to connect youth to multiple different opportunities. I think from one side, there's multiple tools that you can buy that are super expensive that an organization can invest in, or you can do it the free version. Having opportunities, I think Merit is one that we've worked with in the past, having simply just maybe a Facebook post with an event, something that people can find information easily. Also allowing people to RSVP or register for an event makes them feel like I'm on the list now. It's not just, showing up. The old way of, stapling something to a telephone pole or putting it on a bulletin board and, pull off the thing and give us a call. There are two things wrong with that. Well, actually three. Most teens probably aren't going to go to that bulletin board. Three, they're not going to call. And back to two, with the bulletin board, they're probably not going to take the piece of paper. So finding a way that you can incorporate something on platforms that they're already using, Facebook, Twitter, social media, like Instagram and TikTok, those are becoming bigger things, using those to address the population. It's that, one major rule of communications, knowing your audience.
We talk a lot about creating really engaging kind of little marketing snippets about your volunteer position. So being thoughtful about what is the job that you want done and making it sound exciting and interesting and engaging for people. So I think to kind of jump in on what Aiden's talking about, if you're don't just say like, we need volunteers, put it somewhere where people can find it and really give them enough information to be excited about the opportunity.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of times, if you can get into your schools or your after-school programs and talk about the volunteer programs that you have, and then that way it's more that if they have a question, then they can ask you right at that time and answer a lot. So, we pick up a lot of youth volunteers by doing that.
A great point. What are your thoughts on this? So if you're, say, a number of the people that we work with on this project are older folks who work in community pantries, right? So these are people who may not have worked or engaged specifically with younger generations, other than, maybe having grandkids or, great nephews, nieces, on having somebody within the community or not even, or statewide perhaps, and doing some training with them via Zoom on how to best engage, interact, make that space and have, that open, be willing to adapt, as you said, to work with younger generations. Any thoughts on that?
I think what Hawley said about making sure that, whatever messaging you're sending out is engaging. We read textbooks in school all the time. Textbooks are written in a very particular way. Nobody wants to read a textbook outside of school to know what they're going to be doing to volunteer. They want to read something that's impactful, meaningful, also describing different areas. So, a volunteer, we might write a position description, but they might want something like a purpose and objective, what they can get from it, explaining, not only again, bi-directional, what the volunteers bringing to the table and what they're going to be able to take home with them, what they're going to be able to take into their future. And also knowing that, sometimes it sounds bad that we say it, but we can use volunteer opportunities as stepping stones. You can use, it's not great for the organizational turnaround, but sometimes bringing volunteers in to get some experience and work at this food pantry, maybe one day you'll work for a food bank, and then keep on going up the line, and then one day leaving the possibility open, maybe these people, these younger volunteers, are who are going to come and solve the food crisis in West Virginia in the future. I think that's something that's very important too. I think something that we do sometimes is making sure that we don't stress too much the hierarchy, or stress that I'm the executive director and I'm your boss and you're just a volunteer. Giving expansive position titles, letting them know that they have a position in the organization, and also being open to listen to their ideas, whatever they think that they can bring, be open to it.
I think this speaks a little bit to capacity too. I mean, when we hear from volunteer managers at Volunteer West Virginia, the thing we hear the most is how do we recruit volunteers, and often how do we recruit young volunteers? And a lot of it is it's time consuming too. So I think as organizations, having some really honest conversations with the fact that we have to put the capacity behind staff to be able to do this work You know, if we're managing 287 volunteers, we also don't have time to recruit new volunteers or to focus on spending the time to recruit young volunteers. So I do think anything that could be done on a statewide training that could be provided would be great to support those efforts. But I know it's so difficult with small organizations to put the staff time into these programs.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Hawley. Go ahead, Aiden.
I was just going to say, if you're using young volunteers, something that's easy to say is bring a friend. Let the volunteers be the volunteer recruiters. Let them kind of do that recruitment process and having an easy and streamlined process to become a volunteer. I think that that's also something that's helpful. Maybe if it's an application, having an online option available too, maybe making it something to where if you bring a friend, then that volunteer gets some sort of recognition. Like, I've recruited 3 volunteers and you get a little pin. Having systems like that to where essentially you're utilizing your volunteers. And I think it is really important what Tami said, to make sure that we're being aware that volunteers do just need some social time. They do need some free time, but kind of utilizing them in ways that are helpful and kind of filling the gaps and bridging the gaps as you come to them.
Point. Hawley, is that something that Volunteer West Virginia does? Do you do any kind of training like that?
Yes, so we've been actually starting this summer, we'll be offering our rural volunteer management curriculum training as a webinar series, like a 3-part webinar series to make it more accessible so anybody in the state could have it. So we're trying to add that. We're working to create a website on our website where you can find volunteer opportunities. So that should go live this fall. We're really going to do a big push to do outreach to organizations and really build that up with opportunities and help support these efforts to make it easier for organizations to recruit volunteers and for volunteers to find opportunities. We do monthly webinars too, and all of this is free. So we really want to make it easy. We don't want it to be a cost. We know how hard it is with small organizations to be able to put money into these kinds of things. So anything we can do is kind of a state service organization to support those efforts. We're excited to be, kind of working on it. We do make some small grants around capacity building too. Up to $10,000. Those will happen in the fall. So if people are interested in building their volunteer program capacity, we really encourage you to apply for those. If it was youth focused, that would be cool too, but that isn't a requirement.
Those all sound awesome. I'm going to need to follow up with you and make sure we get information about this out to the growing email list we have for this project. But I was thinking, maybe something that we could talk about after the series is over is doing an educational webinar where we find the Aidens from around the state who can speak to engaging youth from their perspective. I think that would be really powerful. And like Aiden said, giving them that incentive to kind of take initiative and share, I think would be really powerful. I think I'd love part of that. So Nyla says, with extension programs, we have a long history of collaborating with schools and other civic organizations. We must meet kids where they are, and we were talking about this before we started, extension has, it's such a huge, important program across the state. It does so many things. And one of them, importantly, is working with schools. And I think that's really where we need to ensure any work that we do in trying to engage youth is to get the word out to schools so they can help share that information. It's a good segue to the next question. Is it feasible to build a statewide network to engage younger populations in this work? What do you think? Do you think it's something that should stay on a local level? There's more success there, or is it something that can be built statewide?
I mean, from the point of view of a statewide agency, we would love to support efforts to make, kind of statewide these things available. I mean, I think right now things are done more on a community level, and that's been pretty successful. But certainly, Volunteer West Virginia would be interested in what we could do on a statewide level. I think historically, even we've kind of supported regional efforts around this. And so I think we are trying to think a little bit more about what we can provide, particularly with everything after COVID going more virtual. What can we just make available to everyone in the state?
I think it is something that there has to be a contrast between the local and state level. I think if you have only one opportunity throughout the entire state that everyone's supposed to submit their volunteer opportunities to, I think a lot of the volunteer opportunities would be lost. But I think Volunteer West Virginia already has somewhat of a system that we've used before, that you can list your volunteer opportunities and have kind of, this organization page, but it also is available to the entire state, to where, somebody in Boone County could come and find opportunities throughout all of West Virginia, as long as I'm entering them on my side, which is that really good contrast between local and state, that it kind of produces one place, that a one-stop shop, you could say, that people can go to find somewhere to volunteer. Being able to filter out by county or by community is also important, so that you can find something that's near you. But I think that making sure that our volunteer opportunities are listed somewhere, that people can find them in one spot, is important. A lot of volunteer opportunities get lost. A lot of volunteers get lost because we're not finding them. We're not giving them the information they need to be able to, integrate in with our programs or provide their volunteer service at our opportunities.
That's a great point. So here's my thinking on it from, this is our third year of the Health and Hunger Summit. And we have talked extensively over the last 2 years about the fact that we need to get more young people involved. But we don't have a robust food resource network infrastructure in place, to where, we just have a problem with, on a county level, knowing where all the pantries are, who operates them, when they're open, that sort of thing. And so to try and create a network to where we can plug kids into any or young adults to any pantry in the state means we first have to create that network, right? And then in order, because if you don't do that, then I don't know how young people would even know that those opportunities existed. And so that to me, I think one of the ideas that we came up with last year that everyone agrees on is building this robust network where we can get kids, even middle school, high school, and then college students plugged in, is a wonderful idea, but the logistics of it are really what kind of trip us up. But I think a great starting point is working with Volunteer West Virginia, and then figuring out what can happen on that state level, and then what can happen on the community level.
I wonder if there's any work we could do with 211. I mean, because I imagine all of those pantries are listed on 211. And I mean, 211 is always an organization that needs resources, but I wonder if we were able to provide additional resources, if they could kind of also match volunteers to what's there. I don't know that 211 is ever used that way, and you wouldn't want to overstep, the most important role of that, which is helping people access resources in their community. But it'd be interesting if there was some support you could do there.
So not all of our pantries are in 211. That is one, I think that's one of the first steps that we identified needs to happen, is we really need to ensure that our resources are in 211. And we have people who are panelists just for this session who don't necessarily agree that everything needs to be put into 211. But to me, finding that centralized hub is key, because then that's where you start kind of trying to build that network. But you're right. I mean, I think that the good news is we have 211, but that it's using it in a way that isn't directly the way it is to be used.
Yeah.
There are a couple of points that are really interesting in this discussion that I have. One is I kind of envision a map that has not only all of the different food pantries and other opportunities around food and health that people can volunteer at, but also that same map that, if you click on the app, it shows you where the closest food pantry or food event that you can access it. So when we're creating this network, not only is it helping us with volunteers, but it's also helping to build capacity for families and children to find a resource more quickly. Also with that, I think if we have an opportunity to build something that you have to find this comparison between, not trying to take a state agency or taking a state organization that's coming and trying to take these local opportunities. I think something that you mentioned, Kelly, about people not agreeing that everything needs to be on 2-in-1. It's not necessarily about control. It's about access. We're not coming in and trying to control your food pantry or control your event. We're trying to make it more accessible. I think trying to find that happy medium will be the most difficult part, and figuring out whose responsibility it is to do that. Is it 2-in-1? Is it Volunteer West Virginia? Is it Think Kids? Finding out who is the responsible stakeholder, that's the most important and hardest question at the same time.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Yes. And I completely agree with you in that, we have to ensure that we're purposeful in the way we approach, say, smaller pantries, because some of these smaller pantries, I'm always blown away where, like the quotes that you saw, where they've got it going on, right? they have their volunteers, they've got all of these things working for them. And, the point of trying to get them connected to a larger network isn't necessarily at all to change what they're doing, but to really learn from what they're doing, because they've done something that has created that this communication and respect between different organizations and groups, to where they're kind of singing in harmony with all these different people. And if we can figure out a way to grow that and plug into it and create more of a statewide network, then that's where we'd really find the opportunities to get kids, young generations, more involved in the work that we do. And I apologize for keep saying kids. I'm just so used to saying the word kids all the time because I work for Think Kids, but we're talking about younger adults.
Another value that comes as an organization when I hear of building a statewide network like that, Gina Neme at Volunteer West Virginia has done a lot of work on building a network of all of our CERT programs. We're able to communicate with each other, which is great. And we've been able to make connections. That can happen with the food pantries too, being able to communicate and see, maybe you didn't even know that there was another food pantry doing the same mission, the same objective, just 10 miles down the road from you. And you're able to, well, I don't have any of this canned good, but we have a lot of people who are needing this. How can we work with each other, make collaborative, collective approaches at solving the same mission? We're all working for the same goal, so we can work as a team.
Right. Right. Anybody else have anything to add to that before I get to the next question? Okay. Is it feasible to do this work that we're just talking about on the local level? And if so, what tools would smaller organizations need to succeed in this work? So if a pantry wants to bring in younger generations, youth, to help with their mission, what kind of tools would they need to do that?
I think here's where we start reaching a roadblock. Carlson is really something that's a barrier to being able to provide online virtual opportunities, and also being able to provide things like, some of the stuff that we're talking about, having a network of food pantries or even a network of volunteer opportunities. We do it with Google Workspace, which provides an enhanced interoperability with the state. But it's expensive. We're looking at, for a smaller organization like ours, only our top level staff members actually have Google accounts. We're looking at over $1,000 a year in that, just for somebody, just to have an email. And then, you have additional things, being able to manage social media networks together, being able to have Zoom conferences like this. Is it feasible? Yes. Do I think that it's difficult for some organizations, especially smaller organizations? Absolutely.
Great point. Nyla said training on engaging youth, positive youth development principles, and volunteer management. So I love the sound of positive youth development principles. I don't know what those are, but maybe we can get some of that information from Nyla, because I bet they do, and we can share that. Tami or Hawley, do you have anything to add to local level?
I don't know if I have anything I haven't mentioned. I mean, we're really working at Volunteer West Virginia to make resources we have available free to small organizations, so that we're not adding any cost burden. And I mean, I think a lot of the things we've mentioned are tools that small organizations can use.
Can I ask you, Hawley, do you know a lot of churches that are part of your membership?
We don't, which I also think is interesting because many times churches are nonprofits and we love to work with churches when we're able to do so. So I think those are definitely a place where we could grow in our ability to connect with communities.
I think that's huge. And that's something that we really considered doing on another project and then with some groups that I work with, because we know that when it comes to the foster care system, child welfare system, that many of the volunteer resources that are out there in our communities are owned and managed by the faith-based community. And yet, when we have conversations on the state level as to how to address some of these challenges, we don't have space for the faith-based community at the table. And I think that one of the reasons for that is that they're not, one cohesive unit, right? There's the Council of Churches, so you have some there. You have Catholic Charities, you have some there, but an all-inclusive group you don't have. And so I wonder if that's an important conversation to have, is to, maybe do some focus groups with the faith-based community to see how do we engage you in more volunteer opportunities. And give, and like you said, bi-directional, give them that space to say, you do these blessing boxes and backpack programs and all of these things. What can we do to help you do what you do better?
I love that idea.
Because I bet they would probably say more volunteer help on that community level.
I think that's a great idea. Also, something to just throw out there, there are a lot of programs that if you're a registered nonprofit that you can get for free. Google's one of those. If you have a 501c3, you can apply to have a Google Workspace account for free, virtually no cost. You can also do the same thing with platforms like Canva to do social media management. That's what we use. You get 10 free users, and all of our social media is managed through there. You can create the social media posts as well as automatically post them and schedule them out. You just really have to look for the resources and use each other. People who have been there, done that, use their opportunities that they've already, kind of overcome, and go from there.
These are great ideas. Aiden, do you know if there are any nonprofits, well, Hawley may know this too, in the state that are kind of youth-based and youth-led volunteer programs? Do we have any of those? I don't know of any off the top of my head.
Nothing's coming to mind for me.
Not that I can think of. I think that's one of the things that Hawley said, that we have to be open to change. That's a huge change. Do I think that it's something that's negative at all? Absolutely not. But I think there are actually a lot of systemic barriers to doing that. Even from applying to get a 501c3 to other things that require a legally bounding signature, you have to be 18, and other things that may not be things that just can easily be overcome by a mindset, things that are systemically likely to allow for young people to create volunteer organizations.
It's a great point. You see, I was thinking, we started Think Kids in 2020, but I'm somebody who is old school nonprofit. So the notion of starting a 501c3 didn't seem very daunting to me. But back when I was younger and getting into the nonprofit system, I was living in North Carolina, and one of the opportunities, if you worked for a 501c3, was I was able to take courses at Duke University on nonprofit management for very little cost. And so there were a number of people who were, in their 20s like me, taking classes on how to start a nonprofit, run a nonprofit. And so I really think if we had opportunities that would demystify kind of the idea of how to start and run a nonprofit, that may encourage more young people to, think about starting or working for nonprofits themselves. That sounds like something that I should talk to for WVU Extension. And that leads into our next question. What partners should be engaged in moving this concept from idea to fruition? And Nyla said WVU Extension. So we've got them on the list already. Do you have any other ideas? Volunteer West Virginia, of course.
Yep, that was going to be my answer. Reach out to us.
And I think with the community organizations in your schools, those are good places to partner.
I think it's my recommendation is being able to think outside the box. Unconventional partners sometimes make the best planning partners. They give out the best ideas sometimes. It might not be somebody that you think about, just like we were talking about churches and other faith-based organizations who are making a direct impact to health and hunger across the state of West Virginia. And frequently they're forgotten about. Bringing those people to the table. Also, not, restricting the size of the table, not saying, we only have 6 seats. Sorry, you didn't make the cut. I think bringing as many people, because what we've noticed is, you send out an expansive invite, maybe you invite 30 people and you're like, I'd really like to have all of these people. Sometimes only about 10 of those show up, but those 10 people that show up are going to make a change. They're going to be the ones who really take an impactful approach. And I think that that's sort of the essence of volunteerism is the people who want to make a change are the ones who are going to show up at that food pantry. They're the ones that are going to show up in an opportunity to make a difference, because that's what we're all here for, is to make a change, to make a difference, for a positive outcome for our communities.
That's a great point. And I just want to mention, when we started this project in 2020 and we started talking about, all right, who needs to come to the table? And we were talking statewide. And the list we started getting immediately was is government systems, right? And it was kind of clear to me as we were talking about it, that we were talking as if these systems, because in certain ways they do kind of own or control certain aspects, certainly of the healthcare system, but also in, you're talking about WIC, SNAP. There are other parts of the system, but when it comes to kind of the day-to-day, what happens on the boots in the ground, it's a lot of nonprofits that are doing that work, and churches. And so the next year when we started connecting with Step by Step, that's when I learned that they do all this stuff, right? And they work with all these different groups. And it was really talking with Michael when we started talking about schools, which I hope to talk about in a minute or two, that there's so much to learn from how nonprofits engage with schools, for example, because it's a tendency when you're talking about things statewide, you talk to the State Department of Ed. But talking with the State Department of Ed is very different than, say, talking with Lincoln County schools. And your experience working with Lincoln County schools may be very different than, say, Logan County schools. And so you learn a lot about kind of the atmosphere on that local level, and whether there's kind of fertile ground for building those relationships, and whether or not there's kind of a moat around the institution and they don't really like working with outside partners. And so I do think that we're bringing these community nonprofits that may not be doing work statewide still have an important wisdom to bring to the table.
Absolutely. I think a whole community approach is absolutely profound and paramount that you include that, but also something that Tami mentioned, sorry, Hawley, the Hometown Heroes Award, having sometimes their organizations who are outpacing the government, whether it be the state, local, or federal level. Sometimes governments aren't capable of providing what's needed inside of a community, whether that be from a funding perspective at the state level or from a local perspective, not having the, I want to do this or I want to do that, not having the, mission or agenda to do that. Sometimes these nonprofits are coming in and, filling in the gaps or bridging the gaps, however you want to look at it. And we have to bring them to the table too. We can't only look at government entities that are providing that, because sometimes they're just not necessarily, they don't want to, but they're not capable of doing it because of funding or some other restriction.
Government moves really slowly. So nonprofit partners are much more nimble, much easier to work with. Absolutely.
I completely agree. And I think an important point to make as well is it's something I've been working with the Robert Wood Johnson over the last 4 years. We talk about, the importance of inclusion and ensuring that everybody knows that they have a right to a place at the table. And we have a tendency, especially in smaller West Virginia, in rural West Virginia, and I grew up, born and raised in rural West Virginia, so I feel I have right to say this. But we have a tendency to we can hold grudges, right? So this group doesn't get along with that group, and if you invite this group, it's almost an affront to that group because you can't have them both at the same table. But it's important to ensure that everybody knows that everybody has a right to the table, can come to the table, even if they disagree. And sometimes government systems are like that as well. They don't always agree. And then you find yourself in this trapping where everybody who should be at the table isn't, because you've got conflicting personalities or, you know, some old beefs with one another, to put it frankly. And I think that trying to do something as large as this, it has to be as inclusive as possible. If people don't want to come, then they don't have to come, but making sure that everybody knows that they're invited and has a place at the table is a really important thing. Especially school systems. Do we want to, before I ask question 8, do we want to talk about better engaging schools? Do any of you have any ideas on a great way to do that on the local level?
So this is kind of something that I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with, but career education inside of especially high schools is something that you can use. A lot of them have some sort of culinary class or something like business marketing. Maybe they have some sort of digital configuration class, like building websites. You know, incorporating those people that already have a knowledge, already have a skill set in a particular area, kind of wipes out that needing to train something. You already have that skill, kind of tapping into that. Also, a lot of those programs have some sort of a community outreach or community involvement aspect of their curriculum. You know, make a partnership, build an MOU, some sort of understanding between the two groups, whether it be a nonprofit or a church maybe, and the school program that, you know, you want to let that be your community opportunity, working with your nonprofit, food pantry, whatever.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Aiden. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, there are classes that are being taught that could have a direct connection with the work that the pantries or groups like Tami are already doing. Tami, you have a pretty good relationship with your school system, with your community center, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We do. And a lot of the teens, they come from, it's actually Loving County, but with where we're at in Lincoln County, where we're on the line. So a lot of the kids in our area go to Chapmansville instead of going to Hamlin. And the biggest part of my volunteers are from Chapmansville Regional. And they are really good. I can go there for the after school and I can hold my focus groups there. So if it's a transportation issue, then, you know, they can ride the after school buses home or something. So it's, you know, we have a really great communication and partnership with the schools.
Yeah.
that's great. I didn't think about that. I want to prod that a little bit. So they have after school buses that you utilize, correct? Is that what you said?
Yes, we do. The county helps us provide the buses to be able to transport the children from the after school. So, and then in the summer program, like my summer program, the county also provides the buses and for the summer program for transportation. And it's in our area, you know, the transportation is one of the major issues. So it really helps to have that support.
Right. Yeah, we're going to talk about that, but I was just thinking, you know, I don't know how much of lack of transportation could be an issue from stopping youth from volunteering in pantries or other food resource providers around the state. But that could be a real challenge. Maybe we'll roll some of that into the questions that we ask next week. What kind of policies and funding would need to be in place to move the idea of some of the ideas that we discussed forward?
From a policy perspective, we've all discussed this at some point in the questions that we've talked about, not knowing whose responsibility this is. I think that one of these situations is we're contrasting volunteerism, which obviously would be Hawley's area, but we're also contrasting Department of Ed. We're also contrasting Department of Agriculture. We're bringing in all of these intergovernmental relationships from both the state, local, and even sometimes federal level with different types of grants and things. We're also bringing in higher ed with the WVU Extension Office. We have all these different partnerships that are coming together, but we don't really have a clear leader or a clear person who's driving forward. We kind of just have all of these smaller groups working together, trying to, one mission, one goal, but we don't really have a cohesive way that that's working together. From a policy perspective, I think that that's something, defining the lines and figuring out clear lines of responsibility and, assigning assignments and tasks to get things done quickly and effectively. It doesn't necessarily have to be a government entity. It could be a nonprofit, but somebody trying to make those connections and bring everybody to the table, like you said, Kelly, and going forward with it. From a funding perspective, I think something that is effectively and efficiently using funds. It's not necessarily that we need billions and billions or millions of dollars. It's that whatever money we do have, we need to effectively use and efficiently use it so that we're helping as many people as possible in the best way possible.
That's a great point. Completely agree. I think that would be, I think a wonderful first step would be ensuring that nobody's already doing this, right? So that happens to me sometimes when, somebody gets an idea to the point where it goes to the legislature and somebody starts asking for money, and then somebody comes in and says, we're already doing this, because we don't have that centralized location, which is, one of the big challenges. And then, like you said, Aiden, creating definitive tasks and responsibilities and finding out, who is doing what, who should do what, and then think about what kind of policies need to be in place and who would need specific money to complete the tasks that need to occur in order for this to move forward.
Precisely. You said it, duplication of effort, super important. If we're two people trying to do the same thing and we're just pulling resources from each other, and we could combine those, or somebody take on a different responsibility that also needs to be filled. It's a community effort.
Completely agree. And sometimes we accidentally step on toes when it's something that is a mission or an objective that someone's trying to complete. And instead of coming in and saying, we want to help you do this, we accidentally, are suddenly competing against them. Hawley, do you receive funding from the state to complete the efforts that you do?
Yes, we do. Yes. Yeah. The majority of our funding is federal, but it does have a state match component. So there's definitely money from the legislature that supports our work as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah, it's important for the state to have some skin in the game, I think.
We do. I think we have good, state support here in West Virginia. It's a state with a lot of service-minded people, and people are really invested in improving their communities. So we do have good support.
That's great. Before we open the floor to our additional questions that we have prepared and anything that anybody watching may have, we're planning session 4 now, which is the last section, and that will really focus on policy. And I'm so interested in the fact that we have state legislators, like, for example, we'll have Delegate Chad Lovejoy, who's really kind of the guru or the driving force behind addressing food insecurity at the state level. Not finding a lot of policymakers on the local level who are addressing this issue. Hawley, do you find that legislators know from your experience what's going on in their districts to address food insecurity, or to, really that community efforts to address social determinants of health in general?
I don't know that I could speak to health specifically. I mean, we do have some sort of legislative champions in the AmeriCorps space where they see what AmeriCorps members are doing in their district, because AmeriCorps members do have, they're there for, a long period of time. they're really engaged in a community organization. So I think legislators often see how much work is getting done through the program and how valuable it is to the community. So I find that I have come across a number of, legislators in West Virginia who really understand that and value it. I don't know that I could speak specifically to health and food pantries on that.
Gotcha. Thanks. I think that's one of the things optimally that would happen concurrently, and that we could keep local policymakers, commissioners, municipalities aware of the efforts being made on that community level to address food insecurity, ensuring that nutritious foods are available. Just a few weeks ago, for example, Poco lost its only grocery store. So we're really in some ways taking steps backwards to ensuring that healthy food is accessible for everyone, and finding that way of ensuring that, when funding is available on that local level, that it goes towards helping keep the good stuff going. If there are great programs that are engaging youth, addressing food insecurity, that they're aware of those things. And we'll see during session 4, I could be wrong, but I've got a feeling that's what we're going to hear, is there needs to be more of an effort on that level.
I think with local policy, there's not a plan, or commissioners don't necessarily, in my experience, know exactly what they can do to fix food insecurities in a local community. It's something that we kind of, especially just as a citizen, kind of expect the state to be taking an approach to. When really and truly the best work in government happens at the local level. Maybe it is, in your search for finding, I think you said other Aidens, maybe we find other counties who are doing something, maybe it's not in West Virginia, another state even, that are taking an effective, efficient, and positive approach to, solving some of these health and food insecurities at the local level with state support, and kind of duplicate, copy and paste it per se. It's a recommendation. It's not something that they have to do. It's not something that they maybe can do, but at least they know how and can think of ways that they can move towards approaching that. But figuring out who is the one who's finding that copy and paste tool that is doing the copy and pasting and presenting these plans. I think that's, again, one of the difficulties in understanding whose responsibility or, whose role that is.
Great point. Great point. Anybody, anything else on that before I move to, I'm going to say to all participants who are watching, if you have a question that you would like to pose or a comment, you are most welcome to do so. As we segue into these final questions. And if those who are attending want to respond to these last questions, they're welcome to do that as well. So there's always a dog. It's always nice to always have some dog joining. So let's start with question. We love our pets, right? I think it was Tami. Number 1, do you collaborate with local health systems or food resource providers? And if so, do they have youth volunteers? So I'm going to guess that Hawley does not. Aiden, now, did I read correctly that you do some work on that as well in your community?
So I would say on the health side, we partner and work very closely with our health department and other sorts of health organizations. On the food side, sort of cooperating. I wouldn't necessarily say that we have open and ongoing partnerships, not to say that we're closed to those. We'd always like to work with community partners to ensure that we're prepared and able to resiliently respond to disaster if need be. And that happens before they occur, before we even think about them most of the times. I think from a health perspective, though, we're definitely working with organizations, especially because of COVID, figuring that out.
So Aiden, are there more people your age in Clay County who are engaged in doing some of the work that you do?
Yeah, so for instance, our Public Information Center, which runs all of our press releases, social media pages, websites, that sort of thing, is completely ran by teens my age and a little bit younger. We also have actually one of our coordinators, Isaac Brown. He's a little bit younger than me, and he does our service and management. So he's in a role that's, looking at finances, service policy, keeping track of how long people are volunteering so that we can keep a record of that and give them the community service that they deserve. There's definitely younger volunteers working in multiple different aspects of the organization. From the beginning, I was the first younger person to be with the organization during its creation about 5 years ago. But me and the other adults all agreed that we wanted to be open to the possibility of allowing younger people to have a very inclusive role.
That is so impressive. I've got to, if somebody just laid money at the feet of Think Kids, I think one of the things that we would do is ask municipalities around the state to see how many of them have youth, high school, college volunteers or paid staff working for them and what they're doing. Because I think that that's, a really great way, like you said, when we started, Aiden, of learning what you do want to do, what you don't want to do, learning some real life skills at an age where it can help define the road that you see forward for yourself.
And virtual volunteers, we have multiple students, college students, who are working either for a master's in public health, a master's in emergency management, so at the graduate level, but also at the undergraduate level, who have an interest, a general interest in working in their communities with a volunteer organization or a nonprofit, emergency management, preparedness. They're also working with us remotely to gain experience, and we may be providing them a recommendation letter or whatever that means, sort of like an internship would work, so that we're giving them something, but they're giving us their very experienced, knowledgeable, fresh out of school or fresh in school expertise in the fields that we're working in.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask you more about that after the session. I think there's a lot to learn there. Let's go to the next question. Most members serving in the AmeriCorps Vista program serve full-time for 1-year terms. Is this duration optimal, or would you prefer more sustainable periods for volunteers? I'm looking at you, Hawley. Have you ever heard anyone say, we got somebody in a role and they were doing a great job, but the turnover is difficult for us? Or do you think they knew going in that it was going to be a temporary position?
I mean, I do think the turnover is challenging in AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is not always the best option. And, I do encourage people to think about just a standard volunteer program, depending on what they're doing, because sometimes volunteers are better, they're around longer. I will tell you, quite often people will hire their AmeriCorps Vista members when they complete their term of service. So that can be a really great way to keep talent. I mean, if you're doing all the work to have an AmeriCorps member and have them on site and work with them for a year, you've already found out if this person is a great fit for your organization, if they enjoy the work. So it's actually really not uncommon for AmeriCorps members to then get hired on by the organization, and that keeps that capacity. But I do think, when you're creating an AmeriCorps program, you have to be sort of thoughtful about if it's a position that can change from year to year, or what you might be doing in terms of, planning between years with all of that turnover.
That's a great point.
And at the community center, we use a lot of AmeriCorps, especially during the summertime. We have the Vista, Summer Vista with the summer programs. And with the changeover, I kind of enjoy it, because sometimes it's you bring in new people and they bring in different ideas, because it's, our members are from all over the state. So, they bring in different ways that they can do things. So, that's one of the positive things about the AmeriCorps switching out.
That's what Michael tells me. Michael Tierney, who works with Tami, is a big proponent of the AmeriCorps program, and that bringing in those fresh eyes and new perspectives is really helpful. What are your initial thoughts on collaborating with youth in the foster care system for volunteer opportunities with local pantries?
I like this idea. I mean, I think we talk a lot about asset-based volunteering at Volunteer West Virginia, looking at your volunteers with all the assets that they have and looking at their strengths. And I think sometimes with volunteers, we don't think about the people that are inside of systems like the foster care system, that they also want to make their community better. They also want to be a part of making things better and helping the community and helping people around them. And so kind of casting your net a little bit wider in terms of who you're recruiting and who you're working with in volunteer positions.
Yeah, I think something else too is, Haley said it, inside the system. I think we're all as organizations trying to solve the larger problem, whether that be a food insecurity or a health insecurity or whatever that may be, and having people inside of some of these systems that understand how they work, helping and bringing their ideas to the table. That's what allows us to have ideas and possibilities to change these larger problems, to change these larger systems for the better.
It's a great point. I added this question because there's been a significant amount of money that has come down from the federal government over the last couple of years to try to ensure that when kids age out of the foster care system, that they have a safety net, because sometimes they age out of the system, they're not enrolled to go to college, they're 18 years old, they've been kind of cared for by systems, but never in a sustainable relationship. So we have some people who age out of the system and they've had 30 different placements in their young lives. So they don't have they haven't been given a skill set as to how to adult, so to speak. And the idea of putting some funding into giving them sustainable volunteer opportunities so they can see things in a larger context, be given some responsibility to care for others. And, that's a really, cultivating empathy and having a good mentoring adults, having that relationship is really important. And so I thought maybe this would be a potential idea to try and shop to some of the organizations that we work with.
Sometimes volunteer organizations aren't only an organization you're working with, but sometimes it feels like a family. You're working together, and sometimes people just need a place with people that they feel like they have a position or a place in life or in their community or whatever. Maybe the foster care system is not providing that place or that level of security that they're looking for. The volunteer organization can be a resource for them.
That's a wonderful way to put it, Aiden. I think we just did a YouTube discussion with folks from the family treatment courts, and I wonder if we can get them connected. I think that's a good follow-up, because they have these disciplinary groups who meet together to provide wraparound services, and getting kids involved in volunteer opportunities may be a great way to build that sense of community for them. So next question, many of the pantries and other feeding programs are operated by churches and members of the faith-based community. What are your thoughts on the feasibility of working collectively with them to identify and coordinate youth? So we touched on that a little bit before, working with churches, synagogues, mosques, working with all the different faiths in the state to try and create this network. Do you have any ideas on first steps for that? Don't feel bad if you don't. It sounds like a pretty tough one.
I think that what we're doing here actually is one of the good approaches. A lot of times, especially in my community, I noticed that we only say churches, and you listed a lot of different faith-based organizations there, and considering them a faith-based community is extremely important. I think one of the hardest things with working with the faith-based community and trying to bring them to a single table is that we have so many different denominations that sometimes it's hard to define who's representing the entire community. And in that case, I think that it may be that we bring multiple different denominations who are interested in participating. It doesn't necessarily need to be that we're representing a particular religion or that we're representing that. We're representing their impact to the community, which is in most cases profound. Figuring out a way that we can collectively identify And it's different with each different locality. Each county, each region is very different, especially each state. Looking at the faith-based community as a whole, it's its own section, it's its own sector of the community, including them, and finding what they can bring to the table, but also what they can bring back. A lot of times churches are in need, and a lot of times other faith-based organizations are in need of some sort of resource, whether, like we've said, it be volunteers, maybe they're in need of other food resources, whatever that may be. How can we help them?
I'd be interested to have this conversation with some of the philanthropic arms of churches. And what comes to mind for me is Catholic Charities or Faith in Action, Kanawha County, where they are these, sort of this part of the church that deliberately is doing community work and engagement. But they might be a good starting point for some of these conversations to figure out how we better engage our churches in the work.
I think somewhere that we could look, West Virginia VOAD has done a really good job at utilizing the different organizations that Hawley's talking about. They work with multiple different faith-based organizations across the state, and even a couple of organizations that I've worked with across the nation. They're doing the same thing, and they do it very well. They have it very well organized. They don't necessarily, to my knowledge, have that interaction that's stepping on toes or making somebody feel like they're left out. Using their positive outcomes to kind of infuse that into some other areas. It worked in disaster response. How can we make it work in food security?
I didn't even think about that. That's a really interesting idea, Aiden. I forget that so much of disaster response is faith-based, and they do a ton of really, really incredible work in that space.
Exactly. And even for Clay County CERT, we're doing that with different faith-based organizations. They're an amazing resource. They have large parking lots, they have large buildings, they have kitchens, they have volunteers, a large congregation of people. We're building right now a partnership with different faith-based communities inside of our county. And I think that it's something that it's a resource we all need to tap into and also figure out how we can support them better.
Wonderful point. Yes. Yeah. I think that's a great starting point. I was just remembering when the pandemic unfolded and we were wondering, this was mid 2020, right? Where we were wondering how kids were going to be able to do their homework when they couldn't, go to school. And one of the first places we heard from were churches saying, we have it and they can come park in our parking lots. And so they are good at that emergency response. And so, getting them together and talking about, planning, I think that would be a really good next step.
Even flashing back all the way to the 2016 flood, a lot of donation and resource management was ran through faith-based communities. Churches, in our community in Clay, were pretty much receiving most of the donations of cleanup kits, hygiene kits, clothing, food, different things, and then they were distributing it out amongst the community in their local area. They did it pretty well, honestly, without any sort of organization. So
you're right, they're good at that. That's a great next step. Thank you for that. So it's our last question. For the next session, scheduled for next Thursday at 2, we plan to discuss the challenges and possible solutions to improving local transportation in rural communities to connect people to healthy food. Do you think youth can help improve these challenges?
I didn't have a strong thought on this one. I was hoping someone else would jump in.
Any ideas?
I have an answer that comes to mind, but it's so blatantly honest, and I don't really like the answer, but I really am trying to work through a couple of different ideas of ways that especially teenagers or young college students would be able to help and support a transportation effort. But honestly, the adults and everyone else have had a really hard time doing that for multiple different reasons. So I think a lot of times we have even, look at it from a larger systemic issue. We have a transportation issue in a community. Well, how are those teens who potentially could, provide transportation if we don't have transportation now, how do we expect them to get to a DMV, to get a driver's license, to be able to come back and have to purchase a car and pay insurance and registration and an inspection sticker to then provide transportation back to the system? I think Tammy's, example of using the school systems was great with I was tickled inside to know that your school is working in a partnership to provide their buses for transportation to and from your organization. That's amazing. But in a larger scope, I think that that's something that's really difficult for not only teens to get there, but also just in a larger scope, kind of in an area, I think, like Clay, it's so rural. Sometimes it's hard for us to get the people to the food. It's easier to get the food to the people, but still yet, that takes even more people, even more logistical assets and resources. It's difficult.
It is, yeah. When we started talking about the issues that we were going to discuss during this summit series, and I said, because we talked so much about transportation last year, we have to talk about this year. And folks were like, why? It's like the question that can't be answered. And it's not just our challenge, it's everybody's challenge. And it's the challenge everybody's had. And when I was thinking about this question as we were preparing, it reminded me of the conversation I just had hours ago. And there was one of the panelists preparing who said, if we had transportation to take food to people, it would be silly for us to just kind of take them food. We should be taking them medication, and we should be taking them blankets. And, if you've got that going, then you should be doing all of those things that we're saying transportation is an issue. And maybe that's the only way we do solve it, is to try and get all these systems and all of these other, ways we address social determinants of health collectively working together and then transporting these things, which would be a really huge, heavy lift. But we know that fixing the transportation challenge, that's exactly what it's going to be.
This is slightly a comical response, but I think a lot of times when we have a problem that we can't solve internal to our organization and most other, different government organizations and public organizations as a whole, we tend to look at the private sector and see how they're doing it. Amazon's handling transportation extremely well. They also have, an expansive amount of funding that they can do that with. I think, we may have to consider the fact that public transportation has been a problem for an extremely long period of time. We have to think of it differently. We can't continue to think of transportation simply as, one car, one bus, or one train. We kind of have to think of it a little bit differently. I don't know what that idea is. I wish that I did. But I think that the biggest thing is that we consider things that we maybe haven't considered before.
That's an important point and a great way to end the conversation. Do you have any last thoughts of anything, the three of you, that perhaps we didn't touch on that you would like to before we go? Okay, well, I thank you so much for joining us today for the conversation. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the Palatine Foundation of Huntington, to those who joined us for the conversation today and for the great conversation. The video for today's discussion will be posted on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So be sure to share with friends and colleagues who care about this issue. And we hope to see you on social media continuing this conversation going. We're going to write this issue brief towards the end of the summit series that we'll be sharing with legislators before session. And so if anybody watching has any ideas of how we broach these subjects, please contact Thin Kids and we'll make sure to share your thoughts and ideas. Finally, we hope to see you again next Thursday, where we'll discuss transportation, the feasibility of improving programs on the local level to ensure everyone has access to healthy food. Thanks again and have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.